Hunt is headed for certain defeat. Toby Young of the Daily Sceptic and the Free Speech Union, and someone who voted for Liz Truss as Tory leader, is here. Toby, Nigel just a few minutes ago was wondering what the point of this Conservative Party is. Do you have an answer to that?
I'm not sure I do, Mark. I think the reason Liz Truss has reduced the Conservative Party to a smoking ruin, and with reference to your earlier point about the decimation of the Conservative Party in Canada in 1993, if the latest polls, whereby I think Labour are 36 points ahead, were translated into seats, then the Conservatives would get so few that the SNP would be the official opposition, and Starmer would have a majority of something like 350. I think your prognosis is at the moment accurate. Where did it go wrong? Well, I think the problem Liz has is that she never really had the courage of her convictions. I'm one of these jihadists who think that the government didn't go nearly far enough in its libertarian tax-cutting, public expenditure-cutting agenda. I hoped, Liz Truss, the reason I voted for her, I hoped that she would cut public expenditure, reduce the national debt, roll back the frontiers of the state. And almost the first thing she announced as PM was this energy cap, whereby energy bills were going to be, the average energy bill was going to be capped at £2,500 a year, and that was going to cost the taxpayer $200 billion. Suddenly it was announced that the government, having spent $500 billion to pay people to not work during the pandemic, were now going to spend another $200 billion to try and help them with their energy bills. And even in the mini budget itself, I thought there were some good things in that, the $45 billion in tax cuts, although they didn't really explain how that would actually, in the end, increase the total tax take because of the Laffer curve. But then they also said that they weren't going to cut public expenditure. So I think it's inevitable with the announcement they were going to spend $200 billion more, not going to cut public expenditure, coupling that with cutting taxes. It's not that surprising that the bond markets slightly freaked out, but she could have stuck to her guns nevertheless. But she didn't. She did a U-turn on cutting the top rate of tax, and then she fired Quasi, presumably in the hope that this would somehow help her survive. But actually, it's done the opposite, and now she's a dead woman walking.
Well, the economy is, whatever it is after 2 years of lockdown and then Putin waging energy war on Europe and all the rest of it. But what about the cultural issues? We've had 12 years of conservatism, so-called. The country's never seemed less conservative. You try to point out to them that the so-called online safety bill is nothing a conservative government should really be getting mixed up with. Isn't this the best opportunity? And I know we're sentimental about these guys because they go back hundreds of years, but isn't this the best opportunity actually to launch a new force on the right?
Well, absolutely. And that's why I supported Kemi Badenoch as the leader of the Conservative Party in the first few rounds of the leadership contest, and only switched to Liz once she'd been eliminated. But I thought that she would lean into the culture wars. She's spoken out against critical race theory. She's spoken out against the indoctrination of children in schools, exposing them to gender identity ideology from the age of 4 onwards. She's been very courageous in speaking out on these big cultural issues, and that's why I thought she would have made such a good leader of the party. But I think the view of people like Liz and now people like Jeremy is that these things are a distraction. We don't want to get involved in the culture wars. It's an irrelevance. It doesn't mean much to most people. And you don't need to worry about things like censorship online, indoctrination of children in schools. These are peripheral. We need to worry about the economy, about bread and butter issues. I think that's a mistake. As you say, here was an opportunity after Boris's victory in 2019, winning over all those voters in red wall seats because they thought that he was on their side on these big cultural issues. He was a conservative when it came to these big social questions, but he himself ducked most of those debates. He didn't really come out and defend Britain's heritage or Britain's statues and monuments during the Black Lives protests. He and no member of his government ever really did anything about the police becoming the sort of paramilitary wing of the Guardian. They ducked those issues, and I think big mistake, and it was a big mistake of Liz not to lean into those issues, not to appoint Kemi as our education secretary instead of Kit Malthouse. But for some reason, she decided that wasn't the way to go.
But that distinction, Toby, between, I'm fiscally conservative and socially liberal doesn't even work when you're socially liberal and fiscally rat-assed, which is the situation the present government is. They're not doing either half of the equation.